But you'll find that to exceed your own limitations, to try and go after the things that are bigger than yourself, you have to have an ethos. You have to have a mantra that you stand by, that people can buy into, people can believe in, and you can be a magnet, an attraction for other people to kind of like, help create leaders.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today started working for Joe Weider's publishing division of Flex and Muscle and Fitness and helped to run the Mr. Olympia bodybuilding contest until 2013. As the Weider consumer started to shift online, he was also responsible for launching one of the first ever fitness content platforms, muscleandfitness.com. He's now the co-founder and CEO of Jym Supplement Science, a business which he started with Dr. Jim Stoppani and transformed the sports nutrition industry by educating consumers on questionable marketing tactics and manufacturing processes. In this week's episode, we cover several topics, including the influence Joe Weider had on the sports nutrition and fitness content industry, how to choose and implement supplements into your daily routine and which methods work the best. And we take a deeper dive into the protein and supplement industry and discover how many supplements aren't quite what they seem. So please welcome Mr. Mike McErlane to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me down here. Last time I was at your Hollywood location. Is that where Jim's based out of?
Yeah, that's where Jim's at. So he's Hollywood proper. As I mentioned before when we were walking around, so the headquarters has always been in Westlake, and traditionally it used to be where Jim would drive up here, or he'd ride his motorcycle up here and we'd shoot all the content. We had a small space, and there was like a little bit of a front office where myself and some of the media guys were, and then the back half was a gym, and that's where we'd shoot all of our content. And even prior to that, it was us shooting content in Jim's pool house. So his pool house, he had a very awkward gym setting, and so you literally had to walk through a squat rack into the doorway to get in, and we'd set up our cameras, and that's where the majority of all the videos that really launched the brand and got it the notoriety that it did in the early stages. That's where we shot a lot of the content, and even in his front yard. So I would sit at a table just like this, have conversations about what was wrong with the products in the marketplace, what his position was, and really, it was just me being a fan, asking him questions because I could. And that was, my role even at Muscle and Fitness, when that's where he and I started together, was my background, sports medicine, kinesiology. And so he and I always had that connection of like, oh, okay, we are in the same space and the same interest. And I just had the opportunity to be in the same space as him and Joe Weider. And so, I started when I was 22, fresh out of college. And so I was a very curious kid. And the interest in fitness and sports nutrition was always there. My background was in it. I played college football. So my enthusiasm to try and, go after my own goals, achieve my own results, and now I had access to all these great resources. I get to see Joe Weider every day in the office. It was a really cool experience, and so that's how it started.
You actually worked alongside Joe, did you?
Yeah, his office was right upstairs. So I would go up there every time he was in, and got to know him a little bit, and we had a lot of conversations. It was a cool experience. Like I said, I was very fortunate in the way that I kind of came into the industry. A gentleman by the name of Lia Clark, he met me at a gym out here in Simi Valley, and I was actually working as a personal trainer. Fresh out of college, I was only there for a few months, and trying to carve my own path. I was looking to go be a strength coach. As well as I was coaching high school football and trying to even play. And I was going to some of the open NFL combines and trying to get on with the team there. And I ended up tearing my knee down at training camp with the Los Angeles Avengers, which was an arena football league team. And so after that, it was a lot happened in a few short months. Working there, coaching, trying to do the football thing. And then I met this guy, Lia, who was working out in the gym, and he just liked the way that I trained. And I was like, and we got talking, and, as I mentioned, I kind of figured out I talk for a living. So he offered me a job working at Muscle and Fitness. And so I said, sure. I didn't really know what that was and what that entailed. And I get down there, and first week on the job, I literally run into Joe Weider, right outside of where my cubicle was. And he kind of looked at me, he's like, oh, I don't usually have this walker. You got some good arms there. And I'm like, this is Joe Weider. I'm like, what the? And he's like, I just had the back surgery. Nice to meet you. And I'm like, oh my God, this is Joe Weider. And that's how my career started. And then, of course, I met Jim. He was upstairs as our senior science editor. He started just a few months, like I think maybe a year, probably right before I did. And that's how our relationship kind of started. And there's a lot more into it after that. But that's essentially how I got my start in the industry.
Did you manage to did anything from Joe? Were you around him enough for things to rub off to influence what you did?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You didn't have to have a conversation with Joe to kind of get the essence of what I think he did. You just had to look around you and you could see it. One of the things that when you first walked into the Weider office, as a matter of fact, there's a video that's running around on the internet somewhere. Before we shut the offices down, I actually did a tour. I had a video guy come down and the offices were shut down. And so I did a tour of the actual offices of Weider Publications and, got, Joe's office and all that stuff. And it sounds like, you got a tour of a building, but it was like a museum. When you walked into that office, it was like you were walking into the Sistine Chapel of Fitness and statues everywhere. He had millions of dollars of Remington statues of bodybuilders and gold, Sandal trophies and oil paintings of every Olympia, Mr. Olympia he had. So from Schwarzenegger to Lou Ferrigno and Frank Zane, he had life-size oil paintings all over the office. And so anyone who actually came there, it was literally like going to the church of bodybuilding and fitness. And so it was an inspiring place to work because you got to go to that every single day. And it was like being a part of history. And, and he would come in, so when I was there, the Weider family sold all the magazines, the Weider titles, which were Muscle and Fitness, which is what I worked on, Flex Magazine, I worked on that, Muscle and Fitness Hers, worked on that, Men's Fitness. But then they owned Shape, Fit Pregnancy, Natural Health. So what Joe, you could easily see was doing, he was creating different lifestyles of fitness, to try and tap into whatever, hey, if somebody's just a weekend warrior, maybe they want to work during the week and then go play basketball. That was like what men's fitness was. And Muscle and Fitness was more like, guys like you and I who we work too, but then we make a time for the gym each day. And then Flex was like, this is the hardcore, and Muscle and Fitness Hers. So he was really transitioning, I think, fitness to every active lifestyle that he possibly could. So you didn't have to be around him. He didn't have to articulate that to you. You just kind of saw what was going on. It was so easy to see what he had done. And then the Mr. Olympia, I had the opportunity to work on that for 10 years. There was a small group. So my first year there, American Media, which bought the Weider titles from the Weider family, they still kept the offices there. So it was very old school in the sense of like, you're still working for Joe, even though technically he didn't own the titles anymore. His presence was there the whole time. And physically he was there too until obviously he passed. But, he would always go up into his office, and his office was beautiful. I mean, I'll show you the pictures at some point. It's amazing. But he'd go up there and by himself. And so I always thought, like, here's this guy who we all can really thank for everything fitness, whether it's, if you own a gym, if you work out, if you're doing sets and reps, you can thank Joe Weider for that. If you have a supplement brand, if you're even lifting a barbell, you can thank Joe Weider for that. And it was cool because we got to see where those things started. Like that office was where he first brought Arnold Schwarzenegger out, and he got Arnold an apartment right across the street. And so those stories were always kind of running through the office. But then part of me was always discouraged because I would see this icon of a man, who sold the magazines right when I got there. And he'd go up into his office and he'd be alone. And everyone was like, oh, don't bother Joe. So I'm 22, 23 years old. I go up and bother him, And, I'd always have to reintroduce myself sometimes to him. But having that time at being somebody who I think was probably on the tail end of that generation, it was cool because, you got guys like Jim and others who, like Vince Andrich, he's our chief brand officer who you met earlier. Vince had time with Joe. He had every Wednesday, he went to Joe's house and had lunch with Joe. So Vince used to run EAS Sports Nutrition with Bill Phillips in the 90s. Metrex, he worked with Scott Connolly. He worked, and he was a distributor, and he actually worked with Weider back in the early 90s and maybe even late 80s. So the cool thing is that a lot of those people who had the touch or the thumbprint from Joe himself, they've done really big things in this industry, but there's always this historical reference and I think, appreciation to Joe. And so when you say like, did he make what he was doing well known? He didn't have to. He just kind of really had to be around it. And there's very few people who I think had that opportunity to do it. And fortunately, I was one of them. And of course, Jim, that's a different story. But
so in terms of how you and Jim met through that organization, and I guess hearing the stories that you talked about, and then seeing the early stages of your business, and I suppose some of the ways that you separate yourself from everyone else, I'm curious to know the connection, because I was a big fan of a lot of the Weider products when I was a kid, junior bodybuilder. I used to go into the supplement store and buy his protein, and then I used to buy Flex and Muscle and Fitness, and obviously aware of the Olympia. And so as an outsider without knowing anything, it seemed as though he had this great event. He had the magazines, he had the nutrition, and these all kind of work together, where he's creating content, teaching you how people like Sean Ray would be working out, and you'd follow his routine and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose now looking at what you guys do, obviously there's very different platforms. Social media wasn't around then, but if you strip away the delivery mechanism, does some of that in terms of leading with content, educating people, and then finding out about your products through the education, do you think there's a kind of carryover on evolution of what you started when you was 22 and kind of what you're doing now?
100%. I mean, I'll tell you the last conversation I had with Joe before the offices were shut down and before he passed was I told him, he and I were sitting down, and I said to him, Mr. Weider, I was calling Mr. Weider, I said, Mr. Weider, my goal is to be able to do what you have done with today's technology. And he looks at me, he's just like, well, you go do that, and did you see this magazine? But I was serious about it. And so his impact, I think, just from seeing what he did and understanding what he did, from my standpoint, was I wanted to be able to honor him in what we do now. So when you say leading with content, absolutely. Every single one of these products is essentially a formula which was just an article that Jim wrote about for many years. What I didn't take you around and kind of show you was maybe some of the history of how Jim and I got here today. And it's represented in every one of the products, and how those philosophies are still represented in the formulas, and still the process that Jim goes through to get a formula. Because many of these brands now, you can be any brand, and you see it all the time. This is what we're up against. We're up against these brands, especially now because there's no institution that people go to and flock to get all their sources of information like there was in the past. You mentioned it. In the past, it was Muscle and Fitness and Flex. And I was on the tail end of that. I kind of read Muscle and Fitness, in my youth and all that, but I grew up in the web era. So and that's actually what my benefit and what my thumbprint is on for Weider. I started muscleandfitness.com and Flex Online and Muscle and Fitness Hers, and I even built the MPC News Online for Jim Mannion. So I was the internet guy. And so that's really what got Jim and I started. And what I realized was that my generation and in the generation that was kind of on my heels, they weren't going to go to the magazine racks and pick up a magazine and try and get their fitness information. They were going to go on a computer. It was before iPhone and all that. And so I was really interested, well, how do we convey the messages that were represented in print and convert that over to a digital platform?
And also make money, I guess.
Exactly, right? How do you do that? And so that's really, so I was working on that in the background. So I had my own website that I built, and workout program design, which actually is how it spawned Jim and I to start working together. But at the same time, I was also interested in what was already out there. And bodybuilding.com happened to be Ryan DeLuca, and they were one of my accounts. And so I would call on bodybuilding.com for advertising purposes, and it would be Ryan and his brother Jeremy, welcome, thank you for calling bodybuilding.com. This is Ryan. It's like Ryan DeLuca, the CEO who now has since sold it. And so I've known those guys for so long. So we developed a really good relationship. And because we were the same age, a lot of those conversations were always centered around like, how do we kind of convert what muscle, because Ryan was a huge fan of Muscle and Fitness too. And it was always like, how do we convert what Muscle and Fitness is doing over to a digital platform? So Ryan would always look at doing it from his standpoint of creating a new brand called bodybuilding.com. And then I was always trying to push the envelope by saying, hey, give me muscleandfitness.com. And it took several years for that to happen. And it wasn't until I built my own website. And so my website back then, you know, it had a couple different name changes, but I was smart enough to know that I should probably collect domain names. So I bought everythingtrainer.com. I bought muscleandfitnesstrainer.com, flex trainer, Hers trainer, men's trainer, workout trainer, MBH. I bought everythingtrainer.com because I knew what I wanted to do was I wanted to build a website that allowed people to go ahead and log in, create their information online, like, you know, I'm a man, I'm a woman, my exercise ability is this, my goals are this, and get structured workout programs that would release every 30 days, so they always had a new program, but it was based on their goals. And if their goals changed, then they could adjust those goals and a new workout program would essentially be dumped in there. So I did all that on my own, kind of moonlighting from my job. So I spent my weekends, I spent time after work, my business partner and I, my best friend, as I mentioned, his name's James Card. So he and I would build all these, you know, I wrote all the workout programs because that's what I went to school for. As I mentioned, my background was sports medicine and exercise science. So I really understood program design really well. So I would write programs and we would essentially digitize them. And finally one day I'm like, you know, I'm building what Muscle and Fitness should be. And so I brought this to my then boss, guy by the name of Eli Clark, who hired me. And I said, you know, this is what Muscle and Fitness should be. And he said, well, why don't we just put you in charge of it? Why don't you just build it and you can kind of figure out how you want to mold this together? And that's what I did. So, and then Jim saw that. And then Jim's like, wait, you built like this program and you get new programs and it's online and you click on an image and shows you how to do it? Because that was my thing. I was like, you pick up a magazine, let's say you get Sean Ray's workout. Okay, great. It's got what, maybe 20 or 30 exercises. This is going to show you how to do it. And being a personal trainer and somebody who was like a technician, I'm like, if you don't know how to do a squat right, that program is useless because you're going to kill yourself. So I was really big on like the demonstration purposes and making sure the biomechanics and the technique was working right. And so Jim saw this and he's like, dude, can you build my site? And fortunately I was like, yeah, we can. So my business partner and I, Jimmy, we just said, hey Jim, let's just do this on the side for you. And that's how JymStoppani.com got started. So Jim and I would go down to his garage at, you know, gosh, it'd be like 11 o'clock at night. We'd stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning and we would be shooting exercises. And that's how it started. And so he saw my commitment because I was so enthusiastic about, you know, Jim himself. And this was after I found out that he actually had tattoos, because there were 6 years that went by. He and I worked together at the magazine. I didn't realize he had a tattoo. Nobody did. I mean, it was quite hilarious when I found out that he did.
But did he have like roll necks and?
He would, yeah. Well, because he like what you're wearing, you know, he long sleeves. He didn't have his hands or anything like that tattooed, and so he, you know, it kind of came down here. So even if he wore like a shirt like yours, you never knew he had a tattoo, and he came to work like that every single day.
Right.
So 6 years went by. I'd be in his office bothering him all day. Hey, what do you think about this supplement? What do you think about this? And he just said, oh, don't take that. Don't take that. Okay, take that. But I never knew he had, you know, what lied underneath, which was the really cool thing, I think, to his character, because what we see today with this, you know, this persona, it's, in my opinion, it's really not Jim. You know, Jim is very humble, very soft-spoken. He doesn't even speak a lot. He, unlike me, which is probably why we're business partners, because I'm the one always doing the talking. But he's an artist, you know, and he's not bold about trying to make his art in the form of like, I need to make money at it. He just doesn't care, you know, and the business side of him is not there. That's me. And so all he cares about is producing good formulas, good information that are legitimate, that can be out there to people. So when he finishes stuff, that's where he goes, here, Mike, all right, you know. And then from there, he supports it, of course, through now we have social media, we have all the platforms that didn't exist back then, and that's all he does. So once he finalizes, this is what we're gonna do in terms of the formula or the product, and we bring ideas to him too. Jim isn't really the consumer. I always tell him, like, it's hard because you're not the consumer, Jim, you're the source. And people like me try to find people like you. So you can't really think in terms of what triggers are going to, make me navigate towards you to get the information. That's my job. But that's where I think the relationship between he and I had always existed, because all I do and how this brand started was exactly what I used to do at Muscle and Fitness. I had a question. I got to go up to the source as a kid. And like any other consumer, I had the opportunity to sit down and ask those questions that I thought maybe other people might have. So when it came down to, I would literally read an article where it would be in Muscle and Fitness, or we would publish something, and it would say, the 5 best pre-workout supplements to take. And I'm like, okay, cool. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm gonna see, like Aspari or Muscle Tech or EAS, like actual products, right? So I'd open up the magazine or I'd look and I'm like, it doesn't say any of that. It's like, take 4 to 5 grams of creatine, take 2 to 3 grams of beta-alanine, take 6 grams of citrulline malate. And I'm going, I don't understand what those words are. I had no idea. And this is me even being somebody who was educated in, the sports medicine area. Because in college, even if you go through those programs, back then at least, they told you supplements were a farce. They didn't work, right? They were always talking about the 60-20-20 rule when it came to your nutrition, where 60% of your diet should be carbohydrates. Yeah. But supplements weren't really a thing. And I think that even at that time, back then, what I was realizing, the reason why they weren't was because of the direction that they were heading into, from my standpoint, that there really was no protocol. There was no standardization of what supplements should be in the respective categories. And around that time, that's when, pre-workouts weren't really even a category. Pre-workouts were invented by bodybuilding.com and BSN as a category. Really? If you really want to give credit to where credit's due, and that's where I started picking up, because all these brands were now my advertisers at Muscle and Fitness. And so I would read an article and be like, I want to take these products, and now I can pick up the phone and them send me products. So my supplement cabinet in my office looked like a GNC store. But Jim was always like, I wouldn't take that. I'd literally go up to him, hey Jim, what do you think about this? You said the 5 supplements that I should take. It would be someone's product, not going to name drop, and he would say, I don't think that. And then I was like, well, okay, why? It doesn't have this, 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 and this in there. I'm like, oh, okay, but he goes, well, it's a proprietary blend. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's their secret. He goes, it doesn't work like that, dude. He goes, there should not be any secrets when it comes to supplements. And he's like, look, if I give you a workout program and said, here's all the exercises, and then said the sets and reps are a secret, would you do that? And I'm like, no. He goes, exactly. He goes, exactly. He goes, if I have all the ingredients that should be in there, but then I'm not giving you the doses of those ingredients, like there's a specific dose that works and a specific dose that doesn't. And it took me a very long time to conceptualize that in the form of how do we express that to the consumers. And to your point earlier about education, that's the thing that it was like that aha moment that we finally had, was I became really angry. And mainly because there's actually a story behind it, to where my boss, Laia Clark, got super, super sick from somebody, a client, an advertiser, sending him a product to try, and it wasn't dosed correctly. It was actually, overdosed of Huperzine, because the guy, and again, he's a very well-known guy today who happened to be a Weider guy as well.
What's Huperzine?
It was Huperzine. What is Huperzine?
What is it? Yeah.
So Huperzine is essentially like, it's what you would find in like a neurostim product. So the research on it shows it's been used to help out with like Alzheimer's patients and things like that. It's a very good ingredient, but it's definitely like a neuro product. So it picks you up. It kind of gives you that focus. kind of clarity, but the doses are dosed at micrograms. Well, this particular individual sent a product over that was dosed in grams. Big difference.
Yeah.
So the amount it put him on his butt, and Jim, same thing, same time. He sent product to Jim, product to my boss Lai, and it was even my office. Fortunately, I didn't take it, but both Jim and Lai the same day took it. They were both underneath their desk, like having to be carried out. Jim thought he had to go to the hospital. He didn't, and so looking at that, I'm going, these are the guys who are putting products out there in the marketplace? Like, oh, there's got to be a better way.
Thank you for supporting the Escape Your Limits podcast. If you're thinking about creating a unique and engaging fitness space to take your fitness to the next level, then we have you covered. Escape Fitness design and manufacture some of the most innovative, attractive, and durable functional training and free weight equipment used by many of the best trainers and fitness brands across the globe. As a valued listener, we are offering you a 10% discount off many of the products on our website. You can check out the full range by going to escapefitness.com and use the code dumbbell. That's escapefitness.com using the code dumbbell. That's it for me. Please enjoy the rest of this interview.
Is there any regulations in that? I know in France it's particularly difficult to import and export certain things. So my guess is there must be some regulations there. But is there any kind of standard that people have to meet to in terms of, like you say, dosing and disclosure on labeling, or anything like that you have to kind of...
Yeah, well, at the time, it was definitely, I think, more loose than it has become. We are regulated and covered under DSHEA, but even every manufacturer now, there's, very heavy regulations, in terms of, you have to have, FDA approval and compliance and NSF Sport and third-party audits. And so a lot of that nefarious stuff from early on, 20, 25 years ago, I think, it still happens. There's always in every industry, there's going to be fringe, somebody who's going to be doing something nefarious. We've actually seen that even recently, with some former, some brand owners who were formerly involved in some nefarious things, now that are paying the consequences for that. But those things have relatively been cleaned up from the industry, I think, because of us. But there was an attempt back in 2003 to form a regulatory body that was headed up by AMI and Weider. And I forget what we were trying to call it, but essentially we all had a big meeting at the Arnold Classic. And so Arnold Schwarzenegger, that was the same year that he won the governorship of California. And so there was a big meeting, and I was a part of it. Jim was a part of it, and the idea was like, okay, listen, guys, it was right when ephedra kind of had its issue and got pulled from the market, and then all the Balco stuff with the andro. So pro hormones were kind of next on the chopping block. So you had eyeballs from the regulatory bodies politically who were coming after the supplement industry. And let's face it, at some point, I'm telling you right now, they want you to get a prescription, get a protein powder. That if you just look at what's going on, you look at all the things that have been happening over the years. Sports nutrition, the supplement industry, we own fat loss. And so the real pandemic in especially the States is, people dying of obesity and heart disease. The solutions of products that serve the marketplace to try and help cope with that. You can walk into GNC and get a thermogenic and something that will actually help you during that process. It's not going to solve your problems. You have to do it with the right diet and exercise. But ultimately, the role that sports nutrition plays is very crucial, in which there's, yes, big pharma and all these regulatory bodies that want to come down because there's just money in it. So what we tried to do back then was form a regulatory body to where we collectively would get like the GNCs in the room, the bodybuilding.coms, and every major brand, and just kind of have an agreement saying like, listen, we're not going to allow any of these nefarious fringe brands to come into the market and ruin things for us. So we're going to try and standardize the industry. And funny enough, Jim was supposed to be the lead scientist or person who would basically make sure that the boxes were checked based on what should go into products. Shouldn't be using this ingredient because this has the research that's a little fuzzy on it. So he was asked to kind of be like that person that could essentially write the standards of supplementation. And, but long story short, nobody could agree. Well, that guy over there, it was like it was a shouting match. We're in the room and, well, this brand over here, they've been doing this shit for years and blah, 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 blah. Well, and it's just like, okay, this isn't going to work, right? You can't get a group of highly competitive people in the same room and get them to agree on things. So I took that for many years and I never forgot about that. And so Jim and I talk about this all the time, and Jim's mentioned this. He goes, the only way that you can affect change in an industry, especially like this one, is you gotta educate the consumers. There's no reason why somebody who has half a brain would want to go out and buy products that are food and say, gosh, I really need high fructose corn syrup and trans fats in there, right? They know to look out for those, not to want them. So what it's done in the food industry is now what you see a lot of these companies that won't put those in there purposely, because they know if they do, the consumer is going to, cancel them out. So taking that as kind of a stepping stone into what you can do with supplements, that's really what this brand was founded on. How do you standardize a pre-workout category, which was essentially new when I first started? Now it's 25 years old. And when we started up in even till 2013, what was happening with pre-workouts, what I was noticing, and Jim, of course, too, was that the doses were getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It was like a race to the bottom. And as the doses were getting smaller and smaller and smaller, the actual scoops. So you see these scoops and people are like, oh my gosh, I took this product and I feel cracked out. Well, yeah, because it's not a nutrient, it's a stimulant. And so people were complaining, and that's where you saw a lot of issues in the marketplace to where, the consumers wanted the feeling, but then they were crashing, there was issues. There was no standard in terms of what should be in a pre-workout.
Because I guess this particular product, like I've had a bunch of them, we were talking before, and some of them are absolutely insane. I've been to trade shows just to have a pick-me-up, and I've been on the ceiling for like the whole night not being able to sleep. So I suppose in pre-workout then, that's essentially a stimulant, but I have been using this one and it's very smooth, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to promote anything, but it's one of the nicer ones I've had that you don't get that big high, you just get a nice sort of, you just get a nice sort of feeling that gets you through the workout. But do people sort of load it with different kind of stimulants just so people can kind of feel as though they're getting it, but it's not particularly good for them?
Well, the way I explain it, and this is exactly the conversation that Jim and I would have. And then he would say something, because I'd be talking, asking questions, and then he would answer my questions like, okay, stop, let's film that. And so that goes back to one of the very first videos that we ever shot was just about that, the stimulant concentrate and the scoop size. And I'm like, okay, stop, let's just look at that. Here's our scoop, here's theirs. Let's line them all up. And just by physically showing you the amount of powder, let's not get into the ingredients right now. Let's just talk about the contents and the amounts of powder. This is a 3-gram scoop. It's a really good pre-workout. I think probably the leading pre-workout at the time. This is an up-and-comer. This is a really good, here's ours. And it just, it was like just slamming this massive scoop size. And we would eat, when we first launched, we even kind of got a lot of consumers saying, well, I don't like taking pre-gym because the scoop size is so big. Why do you have so much powder in there? I like taking this. It's like, look, what you're taking is not a nutrient. In a pre-workout category, let's start with the goals. You want to increase strength, endurance, and have your body's ability to build more muscle, right? Those are probably, when you take a pre-workout, I want to have energy, endurance, and strength. Got it. Well, this little scoop isn't doing that. There's nothing. It's like a pick-me-up. It's like doing a, something, and then the next thing you know, you're wired, but then there's a major crash after that. And that's not, scientifically speaking, what supplements are and what they should do. That is another door that the regulatory bodies who want this industry to kind of, be on its knees, allow them to walk in and say, you're not doing it right. And so we wanted to do it right. And so when Jim created a pre-workout, he made sure that every ingredient, and really, what's tough about pre-gym, and you have, pre-gym and post-gym there, is that those were actually the product that Jym wanted to have together, because the doses of, beta alanine and, betaine and some of those ingredients are very similar, actually the identical. They mirror one another.
On the pre and
the post. The profiles are very similar. So Jym formulated it together. But at that time, what we were up against when he formulated that was, his real formula, his everything formula, which is coming out in a new product. But his original formula, it was way too expensive. It was going to be, at that time, the consumer wasn't ready for like a $60 pre-workout. We were up against a marketplace to where, as I mentioned, had these, little scoop sizes and be like, a 60 serve of this product for $30. And the consumer's like, I get 60 serves. Well, you get 60 serves of dust, of nothing but like maybe just, pixie dust. So we had to come into the marketplace and not only position the products to the consumers who didn't get Jym's message, but position it in a way to where it was competitively priced, it was efficacious in the research, and it could be backed by actual data and science saying, this ingredient at this dose will do this. And then we disclosed that to the consumers. And I said, well, and Jym actually was the one who said, the 5 most important ingredients that you need in a pre-workout is no different than if somebody wants to do chest, what exercises are you going to use, right? And if you leave any of those out, it's not going to be a good chest workout. So he's like, as long as we have these 5 at those doses, and they've always been on the front of our label, those are the 5 most important ones, and it's our job to make sure that the consumers understand that when they look for a pre-workout, if they don't see at least these 5 ingredients on there, creatine, some form of it, beta alanine, betaine, citrulline, and BCAAs. Right?
So why is that? So that's one of the things that, just to pause on that for a moment. So when I hadn't taken pre-workouts until I came to America, and then I realized everyone's like, you take pre-workout, and I thought, you don't need it. Then I started taking these kind of crazy little spoonfuls that just, they were great if you was going out all night, but they weren't really good for anything else because they just destroyed your sleep. But when I took this, Jym gave it to me, explained everything, and I kind of almost felt as though, that's not really giving me that buzz, because I kind of expected this buzz. But I took how it was explained, and then I realized there was a lot of other reasons why you would take a pre-workout outside of just the buzz. So I guess, in terms of what should be in a good pre-workout, then you mentioned 4 or 5 things. I don't know what any of them are, but why is it important to have this, like you said, citrulline, creatine, beta alanine? What are they, and why is it important for that to be in a pre-workout outside of just the caffeine effect that kind of wakes you up a little bit?
Because those are essentially amino acids, and the data on those amino acids at certain doses show that they will increase strength, energy, and endurance. That's a nutrient. Stimulants like even caffeine. Caffeine it's in our pre-workout, but it's not in there for the energy boost. Caffeine actually, as Jym, and again, everything I'm talking about, these ingredients, is nothing that is of my own opinion that I'm the smart. This is all coming from Jym and just my many 20 years now working with the guy. So caffeine, Jym put that in there for its strength benefits. If you look at the data, the research, there's a lot of benefits. Caffeine is the most studied supplement, I think, on the face of the planet. It's been around forever, right? And so there's so much data and research that's good about it. But, you don't want to have too much in there because some people are sensitive to it. You don't have too little because then there's no benefit in it. So Jym has always been working with different supplements to try and see what effect is not only just in the lab, but what it actually does in the gym. I didn't take you to my office in there, but if you look at the process that we go through, that we actually have gone through with this new version of a pre-workout that Jym's finally going to unveil here in the next couple of weeks, there were 50 different versions, because and the versions from one to the next could just be as little as this was at 2 grams and this was at 3 grams. But he just wanted to see exactly what the difference would be based on not just the data, but the actual practical application in the gym. Those products that are out there that are just, you take it and you're wired, if you want that, that's fine. But classify them correctly. Don't put them into a pre-workout that some 18, 19-year-old kid is going to take because he's got 20 or 30 bucks in his pocket. And he take that before he goes to work out, and next thing you know, he's getting heart palpitations, right? Like,
some of them you do.
Understand what it is that you're taking, because if you want that feeling, fine. But stand up about it. That is what we talked about, is those neuro products. Now, huperzine is in there, is in our pre-workout, but not at the dose and all that. Like, there's benefits to certain products, but then doses matter too. And so when doses of certain ingredients are mixed with other ingredients, there's a synergy that happens. And when you don't understand that as a formulator and as a brand owner, it can get very difficult, because now you're facing consequences based on your inability to put something in the marketplace that not only holds true to the promises that it gives to the consumer, but that holds up to where they aren't going to have a negative, a benefit or a negative reaction from it. So it's a very thorough process, and I'm super fortunate to have Jim be the guy to where I don't have to worry about that. That's not my bag of tea. That's not my area of expertise. So with him, he goes through that, and those standards I mentioned when we were trying to have back in the day with Schwarzenegger and all that, doing that group, we actually standardize it within our own organization, to where there's a process that Jim goes through. It's called the 5 pillars of supplementation. I wish every single brand in the industry would do. But we use that as kind of the baseline, or Jim does, when it comes to the formulation process. And so he always looks at, pillar number 1 is the ingredients. We got a protein. What ingredients do we want to use? Because there are certain types of protein out there, and to the consumers who are listening, types of protein matter. You got, whey protein concentrate, you got whey protein isolate, you got casein protein, egg white protein, hemp protein, right? All these different types of protein, and it matters based on what your promise is to the consumer. The dose matters. So the second one is like, the second one is, what form of protein are you going to use? So you have the ingredient, protein, got it. The form, are we using whey protein isolate? Are we using whey protein concentrate, which we don't use? And then the dose, how much protein? Are we putting 20 grams? Are we putting 24 grams? What does the data and the research show? How much of that ingredient do you take to get the benefit from it? And then from there, it's like, okay, well, let's look at the synergy, right? Should that protein be combined with amino acids? Should it not? What does it do when that ingredient's combined with other things? How do they work together? And then the last one is the timing. What's the best time to take the protein? Those are all things that consumers should know and should be aware of, because that's why they're taking supplements in the first place. And many brands, most brands, they just kind of say, I heard this is good. I heard that is good. And they just put something together, and then they go get a flavor behind it and say, hey, we're coming out with our Snickerdoodle flavor. Take it. It tastes great. Okay, awesome. But that's, once again, opening the door to where you're not validating and standardizing products to where they actually do something. So I always say we're the end of the rainbow brand, because once you find us, you're not going to take anything else.
Yeah. So on this pre-workout then, one of the things that I heard Jim talk about was creatine and the brain benefits. And it made me think, I only found out about this when I started researching this podcast, because as soon as I had that, I used to go out for a run and go for a workout, and I would just have these like incredible ideas, and I'd be writing things down, and I'd be leaving messages. And whenever I have, the reason I'm addicted to this stuff is because at the end of the day, or whenever I'm going to work out, if I've got stuff I need to figure out for my business, I know that as well as a workout, I'll just have this brain workout.
Right.
I'll just figure some amazing stuff out. So tell me about that. Like, it sounds as from what he was saying is creatine helps with, like, there's brain benefits, depression, stress, and also it seems to stimulate some things in the mind. So explain a little bit about that, and kind of what effect I'm getting outside of just a great pump.
Yeah, look, the science and the formulation, I'll leave all that to Jim to explain. He could tell you all about why, that is happening. I can tell you about it from a consumer standpoint. That's the world that I live in. And so pre-gym, for everybody who is within an arm's reach distance of me, is essentially like putting their pants on or brushing their teeth every single morning. Everybody who works here in the organization, they take it every day regardless if they work out or not. My wife, who you met, running in the gym there, Same thing. It's like, we don't know what it's like not to take that product for the benefits of what you just described from a consumer standpoint. Jim will tell you that the data and the research on the ingredients show performance benefits when you train to take that product because of the ingredients, right? So it is a nutrient that does do things and does benefit the body while you're training, because when you're training, certain things happen when you train, when you work out. We just signed Milos Sarshev, and he explained it to me. He goes, Mike, you got 6 to 7 liters of blood in your body when you work out. 60% of that blood is in the muscles, right? So when that happens, when your body is in that state of resistance training, those nutrients are going to do different things when you're training. But because they're nutrients, they're going to do different things from when you're not training. And this is an all-day supplement. On the days that I even, if I have a meeting or something like that, I'm sipping on my pre-gym before I walk into the meeting for the same purposes. But that's where ingredients, as you mentioned that's where ingredients like huperzine and taurine and alpha-GPC, those are the ingredients that will actually have those cognitive benefits too, that clarity. And when you think about training, there's benefits of having that too, that mind-to-muscle connection.
So could you use it in sports like martial arts, jiu-jitsu,
absolutely,
or something where you got to...
Absolutely, all those things. And that's the difference between having a product to where you just feel something and you market that feeling versus having something that actually does something.
So I want to come on to protein, because I guess that's the one thing that we all go to, and particularly nowadays with different diets and intermittent fasting and people who want to put on muscle, there's definitely a lot of talk at the moment about people not probably having enough protein. But the more you sort of start looking at, what's out there and what you should be taking, it seems as though it's a bit of a maze in terms of finding a protein that actually does what it's supposed to. So it's difficult. It's easy to measure, for me, to measure the effects of like a pre-workout, because it's kind of instant. Whereas protein, not quite as obvious outside of how you feel with it in terms of your stomach and taste and that kind of thing. So one of the things I heard you talking about online is protein spiking. So probably a good place to start is, what is protein spiking?
Yeah. What's funny is I asked that same question to Jim back in 2013 after we even had our protein. And the unique thing about that question is it took me months to understand when he explained it. But then once he did, it was 30 seconds of, oh my God, I get it. And so what protein spiking is this was a big problem when we first started. So the cool thing about our brand and what Jim does, and now what I do too, is I'm always looking at categories and saying, where can we improve? Because if something is already out there, and Jim used to be notorious for this, like protein was a good example. Jim never really wanted to have a protein powder until protein spiking became a thing, and then everyone started running towards that. And he's like, well, I can't recommend a product. We don't have a joint product right now, but there's a joint product out there that Jim likes. Does that mean that we won't have one? Well, now we've made the decision to probably have one, but Jim's been recommending like MRM and ProLab and all these other brands for joint formulas because there's nothing wrong with the formulas. But now it's probably a good thing that we have our own formula because, we have a brand. But protein spiking is interesting. So what protein spiking is if you turn the bottle of a protein powder around, most protein powders, whey protein, whatever it is, protein, it's going to have roughly anywhere between most are going to have 24 grams of protein. So the consumer is like, great, I'm getting 24 grams of protein. I take a scoop and I get 24 grams of protein and I'm good. And that's what I thought too. And Jim's like, no, that's not it. 24 grams of protein, you have to look underneath that label, and I don't have a protein powder in here, but so our protein powders, every protein powder has a supplements facts panel where it shows you the calories, the carbohydrates, the sugars, and the protein. Ours, it says protein, 24 grams. Underneath that is a little paragraph that says ingredients. So by law, every protein powder and product has to list everything that is in that scoop, okay? So that's where it lists the protein and anything else that could be in there. So if a protein powder says we have 24 grams of protein, 6 grams of amino acids. Caution, caution. The reason why is because sometimes what a brand used to do, and now because we actually exposed a lot of it, Jim exposed a lot of that, brands were putting in 6 grams of BCAAs, but when you test out the protein contents, those BCAAs show up on the actual test as protein. So you're not really getting 24 grams from whey protein. You might be only getting 15 grams of whey protein. And the rest is just, I'm sorry to say, useless because it's amino acids.
And what's the difference in? I don't understand that, but so...
Well, the difference is that, number one, you're lying to the consumer because they're thinking that, when you're getting protein, you're like, I'm getting it from a source, from, whey protein, which is derived from cow's milk, right? And it's the bioavailability of that ingredient, it actually helps boost muscle protein synthesis, okay? Which is essentially like, the building blocks of muscle. So when you're getting amino acids in substituting that in for somebody buying whey protein where they're thinking, I'm getting 24 grams of whey protein, but it's not coming from the source that actually helps boost muscle protein synthesis, two things happen. Muscle protein synthesis is not boosted, and somebody's paying for something that's cheap because, it's a cheap way, right. Pun intended, a cheap form of lying to the consumer because it's more economically beneficial for that,
to put amino acids in. Because I always thought amino acids, you took amino acids as well to build muscle. So if I saw protein that's got amino acids, I would have thought, okay,
it's more beneficial. And now that's changed because it's fine to have amino acids in your protein, but disclose that on your label separately so that the consumers know. If you look at our protein, it says 24 grams of protein up there, right? But we actually break it down to how much protein is in there from each source. 7.5 grams of whey protein isolate, 7 grams of, my eyes are, of casein. So we break down what percentage of those 24 grams and how much is being used from each one of those sources. So when I'm getting 24 grams of protein, I'm telling you, you're getting 24 grams of protein from these protein sources. If I didn't, and it's not, by law, you have to break it down like we do. We just do because we're telling you, we're not lying to you. Mm. So if you do it that way, and then you say, in addition to 24 grams of protein, you're also getting, 6 grams of branching amino acids, okay. You're getting, all these other ingredients of an amino acid.
So is amino acid, if it's disclosed as part of the protein then, are you saying then that an amino acid would register as a protein,
yes.
But it's not really a useful protein to have as part of the protein?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. So the way that we explain that to a consumer is very simple. It said, look, turn the back of your bottle of protein around, and if in the ingredients, where it says ingredients, it has words like taurine, glycine, creatine, glutamine, anything ending in INE, chances are that protein is possibly spiked. And it's not saying it is spiked, it is possibly spiked. Because when you look at protein, as I mentioned before, we have 4 different types of protein in our Premier protein blend.
And is that I guess it's on purpose, but is there a specific benefit of combining 3 different types?
Yes, absolutely. So there's different forms of protein which are digested differently. So for instance, whey protein isolate, we'll put it in like 3 boxes. So whey protein isolate has a higher percentage of actual protein than, let's say, whey protein concentrate, which I said earlier, we don't use concentrates.
Why is that?
Because concentrates have a high amount of lactose in it. At best, a whey protein concentrate, you're only getting about 50, 60, 70% protein. The rest is lactose. That's the reason why some people, when they take whey protein and it's whey protein concentrate, they get stomach indigestion, they got gas and bloating, they don't feel good. I can't take protein. Turn your bottle around, look for whey protein concentrate. It's not that it's a bad form, it's a cheaper form. So a lot of brands opt to use the cheaper form of protein. I mentioned our bars. We don't even have whey protein concentrate in here. And it's almost impossible to make any stable food that holds together without fats and lactose, right? So lactose helps hold things together in the form of a bar. But when you're talking about protein, you don't, my opinion, Jim's opinion is, and I have this opinion because of Jim, as he explained it to me, you don't want to take whey protein concentrate because you get the high amounts of lactose and less protein. Whey protein isolate is 90% or better protein, very minimal amounts of lactose. So it's a better source of protein. It's a cleaner source. It's not the scientifically named term, but people say, oh, whey protein isolate's clean. Yeah, it's because it's a higher quality of protein, but it's also more expensive. So a lot of brands don't opt to use as much whey protein isolate as we do. So when, brands out there saying whey protein, yeah, that's true, but then look at the ingredients underneath the supplement facts, the little box, it says ingredients, and it'll have whey protein isolate, whey protein concentrate, and then whatever sources they have in there. We just tell our consumers, look, if it has whey protein concentrate, toss it.
Right. That's why I get that some of those ready to drink. So I always wonder, whenever I have one, and sometimes if I need something quickly and replace a meal, I have it, and I have terrible stomach. And so I'm going to have a look in that.
Look at the concentrate. But as I said, so you have these categories. And so the reason why we have a blend of protein is because we have whey protein isolate and whey protein concentrate, two different types. And so I mentioned before about those 5 pillars. What form of protein you're going to use? We're not going to use whey protein concentrate because, in my opinion, it's shit. We only use isolate. Jim's opinion is shit, not really mine. My opinion is derived from Jim's, okay? But that's fast digesting. Then you have like the medium digesting, which would be like the egg white protein. And then you have the very slow digesting, which is the casein. So the data and the research shows that having a blend of fast, medium, and slow digesting protein extends the window of muscle protein synthesis for a longer period of time. And the reason for that is because let's say you're done working out. Your body is in its most optimal state to absorb nutrients. Well, if you have a very fast digesting protein, it spikes up and goes down, so it absorbs really fast, but then your body is still in that optimal phase of muscle protein synthesis, and you still need nutrients getting into the system, getting into the muscle. So casein and egg white protein, as fast as you need it with an isolate, because you need that spike, you need that. But you also need another, as that's falling off the curve, and we have this on the back of our label, we actually have a diagram. So that whey protein isolate spikes up, but it falls down real fast. So you get the influx that you need, but then the time in which you need it falls off flat. So then what's your body doing? It has no nutrients. So that's where the casein and the egg white protein now can be digested to where you have a longer window of muscle protein synthesis because of the different absorption rates of that protein.
And is that when you need it straight after the workout then?
Well, that's the most optimal time. I mean, we always say take it before and after to bookend the workouts, because ideally, you want to spike insulin levels. Every time you have a meal and things like that. So there's optimal times to take it. But that goes back to that 5th pillar about timing. So when Jim puts out products, it's not like he's, let's put out a product. It's here's the application of how to take it. So you have your pre-workout and your protein, take them together. So if you look at a lot of the flavor profiles, the flavors that we choose are done to where the pre and the protein can actually be in the same shaker. So would
you'd mix this in with your protein?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can take, like, for instance, if you put that grape, which that's what you're holding there, that grape and our Tahitian vanilla protein together, it tastes amazing.
And what would you mix that with then? Water or milk?
I use water. I mean, all of our flavors are done based on using water. Mm-hmm. We have to assume the most simple way that people are probably going to take products is water. Some take it with milk. I wouldn't take our pre-workout with milk, so I wouldn't do that. Protein, you can do that, but
would you mix it with anything else? Like, would you put berries, or would you just, like in most cases, with?
It depends. I mean, I think certain people, like to make those shakes. I don't. Every morning, I'll be honest with you, I take a scoop of our Tahitian vanilla and whatever flavor of pre that I have, because vanilla just mixes with anything. And so, but that's my shake in the morning, and I train every single morning. I drop my kids off at school and I come in here and there's a group of people in here. We all kind of get after it. But that's my shake. And then so after the workout, I have another scoop of the protein, and then I mix it with our post-workout. And then I'm pretty much done. And that's the nice thing about that little system. We call that the Jym system. So you have your protein, your pre-workout, your post-workout. For sports nutrition needs, do you need anything else? Nope, you're covered. Do you
and
need
how long? What sort of period is that then? So in terms of timing, like before you work out, like what's the period, and then after your workout, and then when after your workout would you then have like some kind of food?
It depends. Jym has a really good article that we've used for several years, and it's helped all those transformations. I don't know if you paid notice, but we have thousands of transformations of people, who have done the workouts, taken the products, followed the nutrition. I've done a horrible job about really broadcasting that because there's so much other stuff, but we literally are the transformation brand. And so there's an article in a nutrition plan. It's called Dieting 101 that Jym put out several years ago. And it really helps identify the time of day in which you train ultimately determines when you should eat and when you should take your supplements. So to answer your question on that, I would answer it with a question saying, well, what time of day, right?
If I was doing it so let's say, well, there's two options. If I'm training in the morning, let's say 9 a.m., what would you do there? And then if you were training in the evening, maybe like, let's say 6 p.m.,
right.
Just curious to see, like, because I'm taking this so selfishly, like when should I take this before my workout to allow long enough but not too long? I'm always worried about peaking too soon.
Yeah. So generally speaking, Jym always recommends that when you take your pre-workout, it should be taken 20 to 30 minutes, sip on it prior to working out. So if you know that you're 20 minutes out from the gym or whatever it is, like you're getting ready, just sip on it. Don't pound it.
Okay, that's what I do. I pound it.
Yeah, and sometimes if you pound it, you'll notice you'll be hitting the bathroom before you hit the gym. So, and the reason why is because
that as well, actually.
Yeah, and once again, that's a 26-gram scoop. So that's a lot of stuff in there.
I half it actually in the week.
Got it.
If I train in the evenings, because I don't know whether that's good or bad, but in the weekends I'll do the full scoop and get the full effect and really notice the difference.
The thing about it is just remember this. If there's any takeaway from taking the products is that we put out our nutrients. Nutrients take time to absorb. Drugs and stimulants, no time. It's it's acute versus chronic. So these have a chronic effect of over time, the longer that you take them, the more beneficial that they will become because your muscles are saturated with those nutrients. And we actually did a thing with carnosine beta-alanine, which is the branded form of carnosine, a couple of years ago. It's called their 28-day challenge. And it was based on the fact that after 28 days, by taking, I think, 2 grams of beta-alanine a day, or 3, I forget the actual dose, that your muscles will become fully saturated and your carnosine levels will be at their optimal peak. So nutrients have to be continued to take and be absorbed daily. That's why people say, well, can you cycle this? It's like, no, you shouldn't have to, because you're not, a cycle doesn't constitute this type of a product because it's a nutrient. Same thing with the protein. Like you wouldn't cycle protein.
So that's one of the things I was worried about, and I'll come back to the timing question in a minute, but is there any danger of just, because I've been doing this every time I work out for quite some time, so do you need to have a rest and reset, or is it safe just to kind of do it 4 or 5 times a week?
I think realistically, I think that's an individual question. I have not taken pre in years, but I'll be honest with you, just the last 2 weeks, I just wanted to take a break because we're looking to launch this new formula of pre-Jym. So what I want to do is I want to just be, once again, that consumer who isn't taking anything, and I want to see how I can have the similar effect to our consumers when our new pre-workout is going to hit probably March 31st, I think, is the week that we're launching in GNC. So I'm purposely doing it for selfish reasons to see, from a business standpoint, like how I respond, and I can articulate myself to consumers when they ask, well, what do you think about it? I can give them like a true response. But I've been taking our pre-workout for every single day, for the last 8 years pretty much. Give or take, not having it on a trip or something like that. But there's nothing that constitutes you cycling it. And the thing about these ingredients too is that these aren't something that is just like the newest, latest, and greatest. Jim is really against that, because we get hit up all the time from different raw material suppliers who say, hey, did you hear about this new ingredient? It's coming out, if you guys brought it to market, you'd be the first to have it, and da-da-da-da-da. And Jim's very skeptical about just running towards that, because he likes tried and true. As I mentioned, caffeine is the longest studied nutrient that is out there. It's been around for over 100 years. It's in our products. Branched amino acids, look at the data, look at the research. So safe and effective is also part of our goal. It's not just about, the latest, the greatest that was going to give us market share and all of a sudden we're going to get a bunch of customers, because as we've seen in the past, those type of products, those type of consumers, that's not what we're after. And those products that have followed that path, and those brand owners who follow that path, they've gotten themselves in some trouble in the past. Not all of them.
Yeah, it's risky when you sort of so on the cutting edge, particularly with something like that.
Right.
Things take time to,
right.
I suppose, come out, and it's like, oh shit, that's actually got effects that took years to show.
Yeah, I just, and I'll be honest with you, going back to that story about seeing, my boss, Laya, and Jim under their table, it's like, that's what can happen. And so I don't, and knowing that I took a lot of, myself being a young guy, the worst thing I ever did was, I remember I called a specific brand, they had a new fat burner that came out, and like, Mike, you got to try this. And I'm like, dude, and I would take that, it was one pill, I would take that before I worked out because I had no idea, I was just a dumb kid. And I would take that before I worked out every single day, and I was like, oh, I feel so great, I can breathe. And I remember telling him, I'm like, hey dude, like, what is in this? Because it was a proprietary blend, right? He's like, oh, it's a master formula, special stuff. Come to find out later on, it essentially was an amphetamine, And it's like, I don't want to take things even without knowing and having the tried and true stuff. And I think after those experiences of my own kind of fall, if you want to call it that, of just inexperience, I never want to display that to a consumer. I think that's the most disingenuous thing that you can possibly do as a brand owner. And we've been around for a while, and we're still holding true. And I think it's because of those core principles and the philosophies about like putting things out there that are safe and effective, that are tried and true. And then making sure that the checks and balances of what goes to that bottle out to the consumer, the promises made on that bottle are kept when the consumer takes it. That's kind of the goal.
So coming back to that window then, like when you do your morning workout, like so you're about an hour, roughly 30 minutes or so in before your workout, and you do your pre-gym and your protein. And then when you've finished your workout, so how long are you leaving to have another protein and
Sure. Well, depending on the workout. I mean, I think, roughly if you look at a workout, should last at least an hour and a half or so. Take immediately upon working out. Some consumers have asked over the years, hey, Jim, is it okay to start sipping on something maybe during my workout towards the tail end? Absolutely. Milos Sarcev, who is Sarchev, I always say that correctly, who we just signed on, so he's now a part of our family. He's super big into intra-workout nutrition. He has a lot of, anecdotal evidence as well as even, research stuff. He trains hundreds of high-level physique competitors, and so the level of workouts that they do is not your standard workout, and so these guys, they utilize those nutrients. So in many cases, if a guy like Milos and somebody who trains with them is just taking the pre and post, is it enough? It could be argued, no, it's not. You need something during the workout because there's so much hypertrophy that's happening that those muscles need to be constantly fed during the workout. So a lot of people opt to say, hey, is it okay if I start drinking the post-workout during my workout? Take the pre, 30 minutes before, good to go. But halfway in, I want to start sipping on something towards the tail end. Is it okay? And absolutely. So in that case, absolutely. So either immediately after, or kind of during the last back half of the workout, pop the post, start sipping on it, finish it towards your tail end, and then get that protein, immediately following.
Right. I've also seen Jim talk about intermittent fasting, and it's something I've been doing for a few months. Been getting on pretty well with it, actually. And I was curious because they say one of the things that you want to start with after you fast is some kind of protein. Is there anything that you're aware of in terms of your products as it relates to intermittent fasting? Like, would you just kind of go straight into the regular sort of protein blend with water straight after it, or is there anything else you've sort of experienced?
I've tried intermittent fasting. It doesn't really work for me, mainly just because I'm not disciplined enough to follow it, if I'm being honest. From Jim's standpoint, he might have a completely different answer. But I will tell you this, when you are doing the intermittent fasting, because much like that dieting 101 nutrition plan, and the way Jim crafts it is, what time of day do you train? So he says, train in the morning, follow this plan. Train in the afternoon, follow this. At night, follow this. Intermittent fasting is the same thing. Depending on the time of day that you train, really constitutes what type of fasting you should be doing in terms of when you start with your feeding window. Because if you're training during your fasted state, you should not be taking those products or the protein. So it's a little different in terms of how the application of when you take those products, because essentially when you're fasting, you shouldn't be taking anything. As a matter of fact, there's a product that Jim has developed, we just have not marketed it yet, or produced it yet, commercialized it, to where the biggest complaint of people doing Jim's intermittent fasting is my energy levels. The only thing I can drink is water or coffee or tea. So Jim actually has developed an RTD, little hint, that it'll be a product in which is developed specifically for intermittent fasting, to where it helps curb appetite as well as give you the energy to kind of get you through it. So that was my biggest problem, is that when I would try intermittent fasting, I would, by the time it was time to eat, it was like the rules went out the window. I was like, oh, give me some donuts. I was carbing up probably before, because you're supposed to take, when you're starting, as when you do your feeding window, immediately you have to hit with like a high, a high protein meal, or in this case, as you mentioned, take a shake. So the application of when you take the products, depending on your intermittent fasting window, is different. So you don't, if you're training middle of the day, and let's say you start, if you're doing like a 16-8, is that right? Did I do the math on that right? Like a 16-8, which is where you're fasted for 16 hours, your feeding window is 8. If your fasted state extends in the morning and you train in the morning, you can't take those products because it'll break your fast. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take them, because once again, a nutrient just means that your muscles are saturated with those nutrients, as I mentioned, like beta-alanine. Will your workouts be different? Yeah, absolutely. Not having those, as I mentioned earlier, when your body is in a trained state versus untrained state, independent, like things do different things. Your body's going to utilize those nutrients differently when it's training versus, as I mentioned before, you go to the office, you get a different, you're in an untrained state. But Jim explains that in his intermittent fasting article, which is free, by the way. So if any guys want to look at it, look up Dieting 101 Jim Stoppani on Google and read through that. Or look up Intermittent Fasting Jim Stoppani on Google. And we make all that content available for free, because once again, these are questions, to your point, that people have, and it's important to educate them. So we have thousands of articles, Jim has thousands of articles that he's written to help out with that process. So
final question on protein then, like what do you guys recommend, assuming that people kind of have some typical meals as well, and they're not just supplementing the whole day, but what do you, what's your advice on how much protein people should have? Is it that sort of pound per body weight? Are you on that, or is it twice the amount? Does it impact people as they get older, or do you not really sort of have a view on that?
I mean, once again, I'll regurgitate Jim. He's the oracle, and so his opinion is 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. So if you're a 200-pound individual, you should be eating roughly around 400 grams of protein per day. But to eat that much, once again, you're not going to be able to get that through diet. So it really comes down to seeing where you're at with your current meal plan. Like in Dieting 101, Jim specifically talks about track your meals through the day. We recently, he did this, and I got to witness how he firsthand gave the advice to somebody who had no idea. And I mentioned earlier, we're in partnership with these Sway House kids, these guys, wonderful group of guys. So one of them, Griffin Johnson, came to Jim. He's like, Jim, I just need to get in shape. So I participated in the phone call and the Zoom call that we had with it, and I just kind of was like a fly on the wall. And Jim's like, look, I don't care what you eat. If you're eating Taco Bell every day, I'm not trying to change what you're eating. I'm trying to adjust around what you like to eat and tell you when to eat it, how to eat it, and how you should supplement in doing so. And so when it comes down to protein, he says, all I want you to do is track it for a week, tell me what you want, and then what we're gonna do is not change what you eat, but we're gonna change the way that you utilize, let's say, ProGym, to get your protein levels optimal to where they're going to be. And then what's going to end up happening is you're going to start not maybe eating, 3 tacos of Taco Bell or something, right? So as long as, he said the key is to get your protein. If you guys really want to nail your nutrition, is get your protein levels to where it is 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. It's hard to do. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. If you're 200 pounds, eating 400 grams of protein, as I said, you're never going to get that from like a Taco Bell meal or even chicken and salmon or whatever it is you're eating through the day. You have to supplement with a protein shake. You're never going to get to that level. You're just not. So you have to be able to take a protein shake. And so when we offer that advice, we don't want you to have stomach issues. So we don't use whey protein concentrate.
And what about liver? Like I've read that people are saying, too much protein's bad for, is it your liver or your kidneys or something like that as well?
I think jury's out on some of the contraindications of people's opinions. To be honest with you, I don't have one. I would leave that and reserve that to Jim to talk about the data behind that. I'm not a scientist. I've never had any issues. I don't know anyone who has. Not to say that there's not. And like anything else, there's no one-size-fits-all application of supplements. There's no one-size-fits-all application of nutrition or working out. Like, everybody's different. We all have different, adaptations, working out-wise. Some people just can't squat. Does that mean that anyone who can't squat, I'm going to shame and say, oh, you're not going to get results? No, put them on a leg press. So I think... But what we try to do with our products is we try to make the one-size-fit-all product that is as good as we possibly can make for the large part of mass consumers who are looking for that advantage. So when it comes to protein, it's the thing about science is that some people say, yeah, eating 400 grams of protein per day, if you're 200 pounds, you shouldn't do. Well, I have a couple questions. Are you working out? Because if you are, your body's going to use that optimally. If you're not, then yeah, once again, it comes down to what you're doing and taking it forward. Does that mean that somebody, like my mom and my dad should be eating 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight? Well, yeah, but if they're sitting around all day not doing anything, their body's not going to use that optimally. So their muscles use nutrients too. And if those muscles aren't being worked, then they're not absorbing and utilizing the nutrients. So if somebody's just sitting around pounding protein shakes all day and sitting on their ass, I don't have any evidence to support this, but logic would tell me that, yeah, because the protein's not being absorbed to be used during muscle protein synthesis because their body's not doing anything, then yeah, something has to pick up the slack. Their kidneys, they got to filter that stuff through. So it's like when you think of the body, and I had a great professor in college who explained, he's like, the body, think of it like a machine. And every aspect of that machine has to be working. And if one aspect of that machine is not working, something else is going to pick up the slack and it might be too much, and that's where it's going to break down. So if you're not exercising, and our bodies are not meant to be sitting around on our asses all day, it's caveman status. That's where we have not adapted to not being out there. And I love intermittent fasting from the concept because Jim explains it as best as anyone can explain it. It's like, if we're still built to hunt for food, think about what your day would be like. You'd wake up, or is there anything around here that's going to eat my ass? And you'd move, and you'd run, and you'd get away, and then you'd go hunt and search for your food. So essentially, you're working out
in a
fasted state before you eat. And then if you actually did eat something, what would you eat? Okay, I didn't kill anything, so I'm going to look and I'm going to eat, if it's in season, some fruit or some veggies I find on the ground. So that's how our bodies are, that's how this machine is supposed to be managed. So taking supplements and working out, they have to be managed correctly. And if you're taking supplements and not working out, you shouldn't be taking supplements, in my opinion. Sports nutrition supplements. You should be taking vitamins and omegas, and absolutely. But when you're talking about pre-workouts and post-workouts and protein powders and the powdered supplements such as that, if you're not training, then you have to ask yourself, why are you taking pre-workout if you're not training? And as I mentioned, like, I train every day, but on days I always take, pre-gym. And I take protein every day, but I'm training, 5-6 days a week too.
You're not going to get a six-pack if you just take loads of pre-workout.
Right, exactly.
So tell us about Jym Army. I can see your T-shirt.
Yeah.
I looked into that. What's that all about?
So that was actually something that was, the consumers just started calling themselves the Jym Army. There was a guy, I think his name was Mike Host, if he's the right guy. And if not, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure we had a fan who, on social media, he sent Jim and I, he made like this, it was, I think he was like a Marine, or he was in the military. And so he sent us like this shield that he made. I think it might have been like the Marine, some type of military shield. And then on there he wrote like Jym Army. He goes, "We are the Jym Army." I'm like, that is freaking cool. And so my best friend, who's my business partner on the other business that kind of runs, we run JymStoppani.com, which is his workout program website. He goes, "Hey, dude, you know what we should do? They have these new things on Facebook. Jim has his Facebook page and all that. We should really create this group called the Jym Army. And then that way all Jim's fans can post and they can do all that stuff. It's a new thing Facebook has. I think groups are going to be the new thing." And so I give all credit to him and that guy for really starting the Jym Army. And what it's become is beyond the brand. It's beyond just about taking supplements, because do you have to be a part of the Jym Army and only take Jym supplements? Absolutely not. And so it's a fan-based group that is large in part, run through Facebook. So if you go to Facebook, you type in JYM Army, the Jym Army, you're going to find about 120,000 people in that group. And what's interesting is that Facebook has actually reached out to us a bunch of times and said, "Look, you guys are not the biggest group that we have, clearly, but we are I think it's like in the top 100 or whatever of active groups all on Facebook." And it's a great community. So it started out to where people, it gave a voice to, I think, the consumers, to where if they had questions, they could post in there, and it wasn't necessarily just Jim or myself answering. It was other people, other consumers. And so it really became like an active forum, if you will. And now it's turned into something to where, people just hear about this great fitness group called the Jym Army. And it's extended beyond, I think, just the brand. But then if you kind of wanted to, dive into it, the road leads back to the brand, of course. So I don't really, sometimes I participate in there to where if there's an update on the products or something like that, I'll do something. Jim tends to stay out of it. He focuses, exclusively on his own social media because it's enough for him to handle. He can't be spread too thin. But it's just a consumer-based group of people who are like-minded. And as I mentioned earlier before we start, they found that fitness unites them. So it's not political, it's not, evangelical, there's no religion or politics or anything like that get involved. And so the conversations, the posts, the activity that goes on there is all related to fitness. And it's been a great source for us to be able to kind of unite our group. And then, as a matter of fact, we've hired a lot of people who work for the organization out of that group. So guys like Will Kucherik, who leads our customer service, Jessica Lumen, who's on customer service, James Alessandra, he's one of our writers, Justin Cam, he was like the first Gym Army member. He's like our social media wizard and one of our brand guys. I could go down the list. We probably have, I would say, 8 or 9 people. Great
recruiting tool then.
It's been a great recruiting tool because we don't have to explain anything about the consumer to them to do their job. They already know the brand so well.
And they love the brand.
And they love the brand, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. So last question then, Mike. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make possible. What would you say would be a memorable example of escaping your own personal limits?
Escaping my own personal limits. I would say probably the best way that I've, kind of shocked myself into seeing what has been possible has been when adversity has come into play. I think in both my life as well as this brand. And so my best friend, as I said, Jimmy, he always said, he goes, it's never been easy, but it's always been worth it with you. Because I think that in the face of adversity, that's when you challenge yourself to, you're either going to rise or fall. And so escaping your own limitations, I think you have to be pushed into that position to where it's fight or flight. And fortunately, in the situations that, in the position that I'm in, that's my job, is to kind of take on the fight and get things done behind the scenes. That's not to say that Jim has not taken it on the nose, because every single thing that has actually happened to this brand, and we've been through a lot, the brand is him. And so when the brand is put out there in the light, good or bad, it is him who's in front of it. And that's a lot for him to take on. And so for me, it's been my job and my fiduciary responsibility to him and the brand to make sure that it's the structure behind that has been supported. And so, overcoming my own, challenges and limitations, if you want to say that, what has helped me kind of exceed those has really been adversity. I think when you're not challenged and things are easy, it's like spoiling a child his whole life and then putting him out, to the world. They're going to fail. And I think adversity allows us to achieve great things. I think discipline allows us to learn from them to where we can then achieve more. And so, our ethos here at the brand is do the right thing. You might have seen it, it's in the hallway. And to me, and these people here, I could ask anybody here what that means. And that means doing the things that you don't want to do. And it could be little things, because I think that if you don't make your bed every morning, if you don't put your shoes away, if you don't take out the trash, if you don't wash the dishes, how the hell are you going to achieve success at the great things if you can't achieve the little ones? So my message to anyone is to make sure, if you want to exceed your limitations, is take care of the small things, to do the right thing. See a dish, wash it. See a piece of trash, pick it up, put it away. Be nice to your kids. Be nice to your wife. You'll find unity in that too, as I mentioned. And I think that's one thing that we as a brand, beyond just the products and beyond the services, we try and extend that to our audience, is be better people. And when you're like that, the limitations are, endless. But you'll find that to exceed your own limitations, to try and go after the things that are bigger than yourself, you have to have an ethos. You have to have a mantra that you stand by, that people can buy into, people can believe in, and you can be a magnet and attraction for other people to kind of help create leaders. And that's what this brand tries to do. When we're selling these products, when we're providing these services, I'm not after trying to just, from a business standpoint, to make a profit. That's the luxury. That's the byproduct of what we do. But the real high is when I have a letter that's in my office, and a letter, it's to Jim, but it's saying, thank you for saving my life. And to me, that guy, I'm not gonna mention his name, but he was in a really bad spot, mentally, physically, contemplating suicide, and he found Stoppani, and he found, more specifically, he related his assistance with our product Alpha Gym, and this is not me making a like a, hey, take Alpha Gym, it'll save your life. It's just his story. And so to me, that's the most rewarding thing. That helped him overcome his own limitations. But it wasn't through, easy. It wasn't an easy path. It was, he was down a very, very, very hard path. He found something, globbed onto it. Now he became a leader. And so that's really what this brand is about, because when you can achieve things through physical fitness, through discipline, I mean, you step in the gym, you step under a bar, it's tough. It's not easy. And so you have to be conditioned both mentally as well as physically to kind of put that bar up. And when you do, there's something that comes from it. A set of accomplishments that you can do more. You can do, and if you apply that during your own life, you're going to exceed all your limitations. And if our products help you do that, then so be it. My job's done.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for your time. I didn't get through half of the products that I wanted to.
I take up all the oxygen in the room. I do that sometimes. Sorry.
But thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.